A city has an outbreak of a zombie virus. A group of special forces are sent to the zombie-infested city on a suicide mission to rescue a scientist who has the antidote. Will they be able to complete the mission successfully, and what is the truth behind the zombie incident? In the same city's maximum prison, hundreds of inmates riot, and one of them, Rowan, manages to escape. The authorities warn that Rowan is extremely dangerous and carries a large number of weapons. Soon, the zombie virus spreads throughout the city, spread by Rowan, and the epidemic is out of control. In order to deal with the zombies, Major Smith decides to implement a plan to level the city, eliminating the zombies and all survivors to prevent the virus from spreading further. However, in the quarantine zone, there is a genetic scientist who knows the secret behind the zombie outbreak and may find the antidote. As a result, Major Smith assembles a special forces team to find the missing scientist. Major Smith identifies 4 locations where the scientist may be hiding, and the team has only 72 hours to complete the rescue mission, or no one in the quarantine zone will survive. The operation is led by Captain Stanton, and the mission is so dangerous that their lives are at stake. They must be on high alert. The entire quarantine zone is desolate and strewn with the remains of countless human bodies. There were many infected who retained certain memories and habits from their previous lives. However, they had an insatiable bloodlust for humans. Soon, the squad found themselves surrounded by hordes of zombies. Despite being well equipped, they had trouble eliminating these swarming zombies, and the squad had to retreat for the time being. They need to head to another location, and luckily, they stumble upon 2 abandoned tanks and armored vehicles. Although they encountered some survivors begging for help along the way, their mission was to find the scientists, so they didn't linger on these survivors. Upon arriving at the designated location, they found that many of the zombies still retain the habit of watching movies. The team slaughtered the zombies in the building without mercy. Unfortunately, one team member accidentally stepped on a mine and was surrounded by zombies. The entire team is plunged into grief. Since no trace of the scientist was found in either location, they could only rest for a while and set off for the 3rd target tomorrow. At this point, there were still 48 hours to go before the annihilation plan. In this isolated and barren land, apart from the zombies, there was also a part of the area that was controlled by gangs, competing for territory and resources. Ivan is the gang leader who helped Rowan, the virus carrier, escape from prison. The special forces killed Ivan's brother, one of the gang members, which provoked Ivan's anger, and he vowed to find the special forces and make them pay with their lives. On the other hand, Perry overhears a video left in the hotel by a scientist. This doctor believes that these zombies are evolving and showing signs of learning and organization. The video was recorded 36 hours ago, indicating that the scientist is likely still alive. The team sets off again. However, on the way, they unexpectedly encounter zombies that have evolved to operate military vehicles. These zombies were once soldiers and are now controlled by bloodlust. In order to save ammunition, the team decides to take cover for a while, but Perry is spotted by the zombies, and to their surprise, the zombies do not attack Perry. Instead, the zombies take control of him and the other survivors and take them to an unknown destination. Captain Stanton decides to track Perry's location and investigate further. Perry is taken to a camp full of survivors where, coincidentally, he finds the scientist. He immediately contacts Captain Stanton, hoping to be rescued as soon as possible, as no one knows what the zombies will do to them. However, faced with these heavily armed zombies, Captain Stanton and his team have to pretend to be captured in order to infiltrate the camp. But the scientist seems reluctant to leave, and Perry is puzzled by his behavior. Nonetheless, they must complete their mission and forcefully rescue the scientist. However, they cannot ignore the other survivors and must evacuate everyone together. During the evacuation, the zombie soldiers realize something has gone wrong. Although turned into zombies, their shots are still deadly, causing many survivors to be shot in the head. A brutal battle ensues between the two sides. Simon is accidentally bitten by a zombie while protecting a scientist. Knowing that his life is in danger, Simon engages the zombie in close combat. In the confusion, Kira saves a little girl named Alicia, but during the fight, the zombie's blood splashes on Kira's face, which makes her realize the seriousness of the situation and fills her heart with fear. At this point, the team splits into 2 groups for the evacuation. The first group is led by Frank, who continues on with the scientists. The second group is led by Captain Stanton and includes Kira and the rescued Alicia. However, Frank is attacked by Ivan's gang midway through the process and the team suffers heavy losses. They seek refuge at a nearby abandoned base that is apparently a laboratory. Scientists tell them that research teams have conducted genetic modification experiments here. However, a lack of funding forced the project to be terminated. However, the military offered to provide funds for the development of an agent that would enhance the soldiers' physical strength. Through the scientists' revelations, Captain Stanton learned the truth. The initial test subject, Rowan, was born with antibodies, and the genetic vaccine fused perfectly without any side effects. However, Rowan does not agree with the experiment and wishes to make it public. However, while fleeing the institute, a woman being held hostage bites Rowan, who is infected, and eventually the virus breaks out completely. The next day, the group prepares to evacuate with the scientists. However, Kira and Roz hijack the scientist. It turns out that Kira revealed her infection to Roz and both were infected. They hold the scientist hostage, hoping for an antidote, but the doctor is powerless at this point. Just as they reach an impasse, the mob suddenly attacks, forcing them to retreat again. However, Kira and Roz are unable to escape. There are only 28 hours left in the plan to level the city. Captain Stanton contacts Major Smith for a rescue. However, before the helicopter lands, the scientist surreptitiously hands Captain Stanton his notes, suggesting that things are far from simple. Upon disembarking, Major Smith immediately disarms Captain Stanton's squad and shoots the scientist, leaving Captain Stanton at a loss for words. They sacrifice several members of their team in order to salvage a lifeless body. However, Major Smith's motive is not the antidote, but to ensure the scientist's death. After killing the scientist and gaining information, Major Smith quickly departs, leaving Captain Stanton and the others to fend for themselves in the quarantine zone. They are now out of ammunition and hordes of zombies are coming at them. They were unarmed and had no chance to fight back. They have no choice but to escape with Alicia. However, Frank was seriously injured and he knew he couldn't escape. He decided to stay and buy time for Captain Stanton. Frank had one last wish, which was to expose Major Smith's crimes, and Captain Stanton granted his wish. Captain Stanton takes Alicia away, only to find that Alicia has also been bitten by a walker. Unable to leave Alicia behind, Captain Stanton takes her to the aquarium for shelter. While resting at the aquarium, Captain Stanton has another dream about his deceased family members turning into walkers, including Alicia, who turned into a walker. Determined to prevent this heartbreaking scene from becoming a reality, Captain Stanton considers leaving quietly. However, with Alicia close behind, Captain Stanton decides to stay with her until the end. Their respite is not long as they are surrounded by Ivan's forces. Ivan forces Captain Stanton to make a choice. Only one of them will survive. But just then, Ivan notices the necklace Alicia is wearing, the necklace of his late brother. Surprisingly, Alicia turns out to be Ivan's niece, his brother's daughter. After clearing up the misunderstanding, Captain Stanton explains everything to Ivan. Captain Stanton needs to leave to reveal the truth to the world. Ivan listens and allows them to leave. Upon reaching the beach, Captain Stanton glances at the scientist's notes while seeking help from a fortified camp. It turns out that the reason Alicia didn't turn into a zombie is because she was born with antibodies. Using Alicia's antibodies, an antidote can be developed to cure all the infected. Captain Stanton then contacted Major Smith, but Major Smith refused to accept Alicia. As the mastermind behind the virus program, Major Smith intends to bury all the secrets underground. Captain Stanton arrives at the survivor camp and briefs everyone on the plan to raise the city. He explains that Alicia is the only hope of destroying the zombie virus. Therefore, the group decides to assist Captain Stanton in escaping the quarantine border. Ivan's troops also arrive to support them, but during the battle, Captain Stanton is bitten by a zombie. With no other choice, Captain Stanton entrusts his notes to Alicia and fights to the death against the virus inside his body, leading Alicia through the quarantine border step by step. Meanwhile, Major Smith and his troops arrive and surround them. Captain Stanton, though infected with the virus, kills Major Smith with his remaining thoughts. Captain Stanton then begins to lose control, and his team fights through their grief to end Captain Stanton's life.